March 9, 2018. Binghamton, New York. In the college town of Binghamton in the southern
part of New York State, the day began
with an uneasy silence. Haley Anderson, a 22-year-old nursing student at Binghamton University,
suddenly disappeared from the radar of
her friends and loved ones. For someone known for her reliability and active
social life, this was deeply out of
character. She wasn't just ignoring calls. She failed to show up at her roommate's poetry reading, an event she had promised she would absolutely attend. As evening approached, Haley's roommates, Josie and Michelle, decided to check her location using the Find My Friends app. The signal from Anderson's phone was coming from an apartment building just a few blocks from campus. The address was immediately familiar to them.
It was the residence of a fellow
student and acquaintance of Haley's, Orlando Terrero. The two walked to the building. When they arrived, they noticed Orlando's car
was missing from the parking area, and
no one responded to repeated knocking at the door. Realizing that Haley's phone
was inside a locked apartment, Josie decided to check around the exterior.
One of the first floor windows was unlocked, and she helped Michelle climb inside.
Inside the bedroom, the scene
was instantly alarming. Haley was lying in the bed belonging to the apartment's
resident, covered by a blanket and
completely unclothed. Michelle stepped closer and immediately noticed the unnatural paleness of her friend's skin and the absence of any breathing. There was no visible blood and no open wounds. But her medical training made one thing unmistakably clear. There was nothing emergency responders could do.
Understanding that Haley had passed
away, the roommates immediately contacted emergency services. Binghamton police arrived within minutes of the call. During the initial examination, detectives noted that Haley showed no visible signs of bleeding, no
stab wounds, and no gunshot injuries. The position of her body suggested that her death had occurred right there in
that bed. Investigators were quickly drawn to her neck. Dark bruising was clearly visible and small pinpoint
hemorrhages known as petechiae were present
in her eyes and on her face. This specific combination typically indicates asphyxiation caused by intense pressure to the throat. The preliminary cause of
death was determined to be manual
strangulation. While Haley's body appeared undisturbed, the apartment itself told a very different story. The scene suggested chaos, not a struggle
between two people, but someone battling
with himself. A bookshelf stood crooked, as if someone had fallen against it. As investigators continued their search, they looked upward and noticed something unusual. Four metal hooks had been screwed into a wooden ceiling beam near the kitchen. From one of those hooks hung a men's necktie tied into a loop. Directly beneath the beam on the floor
was an overturned kitchen chair.
Nearby, forensic technicians documented a trail of blood droplets across the hardwood floor.
Since Haley had no visible
bleeding, the stains clearly belonged to someone else. That theory was reinforced by another discovery on the kitchen counter: a torn package of gauze,
bandages smeared with fresh blood.
The
Evidence pointed to a clear sequence of
events. Someone had attempted self-harm
using the tie in the chair, but the
setup failed. The person fell, sustaining injuries in the process. The final piece of the puzzle was a note, left in plain sight. It was handwritten, in Spanish. A translator quickly reconstructed its meaning. "I'm so sorry. I never thought I was capable of something like this. Dad, I'll see you soon. Forgive me. This is stupid. I'm sorry." The message read like a farewell confession.
The apartment's resident, Orlando
Torero, was nowhere to be found. His personal belongings were gone as well.
The bloodstained gauze and the absence
of a body beneath the looped tie pointed to one conclusion. The suspect had survived an act of self-harm and disappeared in an unknown direction. At
the same time, forensic teams worked
inside the apartment. Investigators
began retracing Orlando Taro's
movements.
It turned out the first warning signs had reached campus police
early on the morning of March 9,
several hours before Haley was
discovered. Orlando's sister had contacted officers after receiving
disturbing messages from her brother.
In them, Torero referred to himself as a
loser and mentioned that he had left his
car at John F. Kennedy International Airport. At that moment, patrol officers had no legal grounds to force entry.
They checked the address, confirmed that
the vehicle was not there and left. Now,
with a young woman found dead in the
bedroom and a farewell note discovered inside the apartment, that morning call took on a far more ominous meaning. It
became clear the note was either part of a staged scene or an abandoned plan and that the suspect had chosen to flee.
Detectives immediately contacted security at JFK Airport. The drive from Binghamton to New York City takes roughly 3 hours. That window gave Torero a massive head start. While
friends were searching for Haley and
paperwork was still being processed, the suspect was already out of state and possibly out of the country. The investigation turned into a race against time. One law enforcement seemed to be losing with every passing minute. Meanwhile, at 4:00 p.m. that same day, tragedy arrived at the doorstep of Haley's mother in Westbury. Karen Anderson had just returned home
from work when she noticed a black sedan
parked outside. 2 men in dark suits stepped out of the car. From inside the house, she watched as one of the
detectives paused before approaching the
front steps and took a long drink from a water bottle. A small gesture that
revealed the weight of the conversation
ahead. When Karen opened the door, the officers did not go into detail. Their brief message contained just 3 key words: a serious crime, Orlando's address, and Haley. No further explanation was needed for her to
understand the finality of what had
happened. As police initiated an international search, Karen Anderson called a close friend, unwilling to face the news of her daughter's death alone.
To grasp the full weight of this loss, you have to rewind to where Haley
Anderson's story began. She was born and
raised in the community of Westbury on
Long Island. Her mother, Karen, often
recalled one small but telling detail. Haley was born exactly on her due date. A kind of punctuality that would later define her character. By 22, Anderson wasn't just a student. She was among the top performers at the highly regarded Decker School of Nursing at Binghamton University. While many peers were swept up in the chaos of campus life, Haley stayed focused on her studies, consistently earning spots on academic honor lists. Yet behind that discipline was a personality Karen affectionately described as a hippie millennial. Haley had an easygoing spirit. She could quote entire scenes from the TV show Friends for hours, knowing every episode by heart. Still, her true ambitions reached far beyond student life and casual entertainment. Haley's plans for the future were clear and ambitious. She wasn't looking to settle down in one place. Her goal was to buy a van and move to California. She wanted to become a travel nurse, a medical professional who moves from state to state, working short-term contracts at different hospitals and clinics. That career path perfectly blended her passion for healthcare with her deep desire for freedom. These weren't vague dreams. Haley had already completed a successful internship with the major healthcare network Northwell Health and had received a formal job offer. She was just 2 months away from graduation and the start of an entirely new life. At the university, Haley had a wide social circle, but one person stood at the center of it, a student named Kevin. Their connection followed an on-again, off-again pattern. They would come back together, then take breaks, maintaining an open, undefined relationship. Kevin understood Haley's need for independence and her plans to head west after graduation. So even when their romantic relationship paused, there was no bitterness. They simply shifted back into friendship, remaining important figures in each other's lives. Things became more complicated after Kevin introduced Haley to a new friend at a party, Orlando Terrero. Like them, Orlando was studying nursing. He was born in Florida but raised in Nicaragua. Kevin bonded quickly with a Terrero over shared cultural roots. Both spoke fluent Spanish, something that made Orlando stand out on an English-speaking campus. Seeing him as a kindred spirit, Kevin personally invited Orlando to join his fraternity, formalizing their friendship by calling him a brother. That unspoken code didn't last long. During one of the breaks between Haley and Kevin, Orlando began actively pursuing Haley. Technically, she was single. But within the fraternity, this move was viewed as a serious betrayal. When word spread that Tercero was trying to take Kevin's place, the response was swift. Orlando was expelled from the fraternity in disgrace. For Tercero, that expulsion became a tool of emotional pressure. He refused to accept responsibility and instead reframed the situation, telling Haley that losing his status had destroyed him and that he was ready to harm himself. Haley, with the empathy of a future nurse, couldn't walk away from someone in that state. Guilt and fear for his safety tied her to Orlando more tightly than any real romantic feeling ever could. She stayed close to protect him, not realizing she was being pulled into a calculated
manipulation. On September 15, 2017, that underlying tension finally erupted into open conflict. That evening, Orlando hosted a party at his house. Haley, still maintaining contact with him out of concern, attended with her friends. Kevin wasn't there. After the fraternity fallout, the two men no longer crossed paths, but his presence loomed over the night regardless. In the middle of the party, Orlando found out that Haley had fully resumed her relationship with Kevin. His reaction was aggressive and public. In front of the guests, he began yelling at her, creating a jealous outburst that brought the celebration to a halt. Realizing he had gone too far, Orlando tried to smooth things over by encouraging everyone to drink, but he misjudged his limit. He quickly became sick. Despite the humiliation she had just endured, Haley showed professional care. She escorted Orlando to the bedroom, made sure he was stable, and only then left the house. Haley returned to her apartment. That night, she stayed home with Kevin, who slept over. The next afternoon, around 3:00 p.m., Kevin walked outside toward Haley's car and was the first to notice something was wrong. All four tires had been slashed with a knife. Haley posted a video of the damaged tires on social media. Almost immediately, Orlando messaged her, claiming that his own car had supposedly been vandalized as well. An apparent attempt to deflect suspicion. That lie unraveled quickly. Tercero admitted he had made up the story about his own car and confirmed that he was the one who destroyed Haley's tires. The damage totaled $600. Friends urged her to report it to the police, but Orlando pleaded with her not to. He said a criminal case would permanently shut the door on his future in medicine. Once again, Haley felt sorry for him. She accepted cash for the repairs and forgave the act of aggression, choosing not to derail the career of someone who was already showing signs of dangerous obsession. By March 2018, 6 months after the aggressive tire slashing incident, Haley made what would become her most devastating mistake. She forgave Orlando completely. Unable to hold on to resentment for long, she decided to let him back into her life. Officially, Anderson had resumed her relationship with Kevin, but her boundaries with Orlando once again became blurred. To her, this was an act of trust and compassion. To him, it was a green light. The nature of their connection during that period could best be described as undefined. No commitments, but the possibility of closeness. Haley's roommates watched as this slowly turned into a disturbing and unsettling pattern. Orlando began showing up at their front steps without invitation. He would sit there for hours, smoking, watching the apartment windows, tracking Haley's movements and the comings and goings of her guests. The evening of Wednesday, March 7th, started like a typical midweek college night. Haley and her roommates gathered in the living room to spend time together. They opened a bottle of wine and pulled out board games. They played Pictionary and Taboo, then switched to Quiplash, Haley's favorite. Laughter and Competition filled the apartment, creating a sense of normalcy and safety.
Inside the home, despite the unsettling
presence lingering outside. When the games ended, everyone went to their bedrooms. The next morning, March 8th, the roommates woke up and began getting ready for the day. But Haley's
bedroom door remained tightly shut.
She didn't come into the kitchen and didn't respond to messages in their group chat. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Haley
was known for sleeping late and they assumed she was simply resting after a
fun night. They left the apartment, unaware that no one was behind that
closed door and that Haley had left the
apartment before dawn.
While forensic teams worked inside the
residence, detectives began reconstructing the suspect's movements outside the apartment using nearby surveillance cameras. The footage
allowed investigators to piece together
March 8th almost minute by minute. Cameras showed Orlando leaving the house alone that morning. He walked to the trash bins, discarded several items, got
into his car, and drove away. The purpose of that trip became clear later when a receipt was found inside
the apartment. Tercero had gone to a CVS
pharmacy where he purchased sleeping pills and a package of melatonin.
After returning, he went back inside and did not appear on camera again for 7 hours. The next activity was captured later that afternoon. Orlando exited the
building not through the front door, but
through the basement entrance. Investigators believe this detour was connected to his search for heavy-duty hooks, the same ones later found screwed into a ceiling beam. The final time stamp of Tercer's presence in Binghamton came at 8:22 p.m. Surveillance footage shows him loading suitcases into his trunk and driving onto the highway toward New York City.
Roughly 3 hours later, his trail
resurfaced inside John F. Kennedy International Airport. Airport security
provided footage showing Orlando passing
through screening. The video clearly reveals his head and eye wrapped in gauze. This visual evidence confirmed investigators' conclusions. The blood found in the kitchen and the torn
bandage packaging were the result of
injuries he sustained during a failed act of self-harm shortly before heading to the airport. After landing in Nicaragua, Orlando did not try to hide in some remote rural area. He was met by
his mother, who immediately recognized
the severity of his condition. The head
and eye injuries he sustained from falling off a kitchen chair required
urgent medical attention. Terrero was taken to a hospital in the large city of Lyon for treatment. That decision,
seeking medical help, became the fatal flaw in his escape plan.
By mid-March, alerts describing the
suspect had spread far beyond New York
State. On March 13, 2018, just 5 days after Haley was found, hospital staff recognized a patient with a heavily bandaged head. Nicaraguan authorities acted quickly. Tercer was taken into custody directly at the medical facility. The following day, the media saw him in handcuffs and eye patch still in place. During his first press appearance, at first glance, it seemed like justice had prevailed. But the legal reality was far more complicated. Orlando held dual citizenship, American and Nicaraguan. Although an extradition Treaty between the two countries dated back to 1907.
It included a critical clause.
A nation may extradite its citizens, but it is not required to do so.
U.S. authorities
and the Broome County District Attorney immediately filed a request to bring the
accused back to New York.
Managua's
response was firm and final.
Extradition was denied.
Tero remained in custody in Nicaragua, where he would face
proceedings under local law. 2. Reconstruct what happened behind closed doors. Investigators had to combine
surveillance footage with conclusions
from forensic pathology.
The timeline began at 2:30 a.m. on March 8. Security cameras captured Haley and
Orlando approaching the entrance to his apartment together. Anderson appeared calm and entered voluntarily, showing no visible signs of distress.
The door closed behind them, cutting her off from the outside world.
Inside the apartment, events unfolded in silence. One crucial factor stood out. There were no signs of an active struggle. Under Haley's fingernails, experts found no skin or tissue belonging to her attacker. When Orlando
was detained, there were no scratches or fresh abrasions on his hands or face.
She had not fought back. The medical
examiner offered a chilling explanation.
At the moment of the attack, Haley was most likely asleep in his bed. Death occurred as a result of manual strangulation. This is not an instant process. Causing death this way requires sustained, uninterrupted pressure on the neck over a prolonged period of time. Orlando attacked a sleeping person, leaving her no chance to resist. After the crime, Tero did not immediately flee the apartment. He remained there with the
body for nearly 18 hours.
During that time, he moved into the
kitchen area and attempted to carry out
an act of self-harm. Orlando screwed metal hooks into a ceiling beam, fashioned a loop from a necktie, and stood on a chair. The setup failed and collapsed under his weight. When he
fell, he suffered a head injury, leaving behind drops of blood on the kitchen
floor.
After failing to harm himself,
Tero changed course. He wrote an
apology note, but instead of turning himself in, he chose to imitate normally.
Before leaving, he returned to the bed
where the woman he had committed the
crime against lay. Investigators believe
he deliberately staged in the scene,
carefully covering her body with a blanket to create the illusion of someone peacefully asleep. Then he
gathered his belongings, walked out, and
left Haley behind in the darkness. On October 1, 2019, a court proceeding began in Managua that would become a legal precedent in international law. Since extradition was impossible,
authorities from both countries arranged
a hybrid trial. The judge and the
accused were physically present in a
courtroom in Nicaragua, while prosecution witnesses testified remotely from the Broome County District Attorney's Office in Binghamton
through a secure video connection.
The
American side was notified of this
format just 8 days before the hearings
began, yet managed to prepare 17
witnesses for the live video testimony. The first person to appear on the digital stand was Karen Anderson. A translator sat beside her, relaying her words to the Nicaraguan judge in real time.
She was followed by Haley's friends, including Kevin, who testified under oath about the incident involving the slashed tires, reinforcing the pattern of stalking behavior. The medical examiner who conducted the autopsy in the United States presented forensic evidence stating that the findings strongly suggested the victim was asleep at the moment of the attack. Orlando Turtero's defense did not focus on denying responsibility for the crime. Instead, it aimed to reduce his level of accountability. His attorneys argued that he had experienced a temporary mental breakdown caused by extreme alcohol intoxication. According to the defense, Orlando drank heavily, lost control, and when he regained awareness, Haley was already dead. They claimed his memory of that night had been completely erased. That strategy collapsed during the questioning of the defense's sole witness, a psychiatrist. The specialist confirmed that Turtero was mentally stable at the time of the evaluation, but could not scientifically substantiate the claim of a temporary loss of sanity at the moment of the crime. The expert acknowledged that it is impossible to accurately determine a person's mental state after the fact. The Nicaraguan prosecutor, a woman whose name was not emphasized in the transcripts, though her actions were described in detail, capitalized on these contradictions. She built her case around jealousy and absolute control, firmly rejecting the idea that what happened was accidental. Karen Anderson, watching the proceedings through a screen, later pointed out a striking detail in the former student's behavior throughout the hearings, as testimony described the death of a woman he had called a friend. Orlando showed no remorse and no fear. According to Haley's mother, he simply sat there, looking openly bored. The judge needed only a 90-minute recess to reach a final decision. When she returned to the courtroom, she delivered the verdict. Orlando Tercero was found guilty. The defense's argument about alcohol intoxication was completely dismissed. The court classified his actions not merely as a crime, but as femicide, a crime rooted in gender-based hatred and possessiveness. In her ruling, the judge stated that Orlando ended Haley's life because he could not accept losing control over it. The punishment turned out to be the harshest allowed under Nicaraguan law. Taro was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Unlike the American system where a sentence like 25 years to life still leaves room for parole, a Nicaraguan sentence of this kind is final. Orlando will spend 3 full decades behind bars with no possibility of review or early release. The escape he believed would lead him to freedom instead placed him in conditions bordering on the inhumane. He was sent to serve his sentence at El Chipote prison. The facility is widely known as one of the most severe detention centers in Latin America. Human rights organizations have documented methods of physical and psychological pressure used there, including prolonged isolation in darkness, or conversely, constant bright light, electric shocks, extreme physical mistreatment, and systematic deprivation of food and water. In trying to avoid an American court, Orlando ended up inside a system where basic human rights are frequently disregarded. Attempts by the defense to challenge the verdict were unsuccessful. In February 2020, an appellate court
Rejected the lawyer's request for a new psychiatric evaluation. The sentence remained in force. U.S. authorities also kept an active arrest warrant on file. If Tercero is ever released and leaves Nicaragua, he will be immediately detained to face proceedings under American law. Haley Anderson's story did not end in a courtroom, but on the stage of Binghamton University. During the graduation ceremony, she missed by just 2 months. One empty chair among the graduates held her photograph. When Haley's name was announced, her father, Gordon, walked onto the stage. He accepted a bachelor's degree on behalf of his daughter, Karen Anderson, channeled her grief into legal action. She launched a petition calling for the term femicide to be formally recognized in U.S. law so that similar crimes would be classified and punished with full consideration of motives rooted in control and obsession.